So, dear partners, dear colleagues, dear friends, it is a great pleasure to welcome you. I am Olivier Brechard. I'm the director of the LearningPlanet Alliance, and I'll be your host today. I'll speak as little as possible, just being really happy to welcome you all and try to do some of the moderation work. There are very many speakers today, very many participants who are leading learning ecosystems on the ground. It's a huge pleasure to have you all with us. And I'm not going to tell much more. I'm going to turn around and I will shut my mic and ask my colleague Michael Stevenson, who is in the same studio here in Paris at the LearningPlanet Institute, to tell us all why we are here today.
It's great to see you all. And I guess there's been talk about learning ecosystems for fully 20 years. What if we entrusted education not just to the formal institutions, the schools, but to the whole community? Media, business, museums, galleries, that's been the talk. Unfortunately, that's what it stayed, talk, certainly in the global north, albeit with some honorable exceptions. I think what we're now seeing is something very different. In the global south, we're seeing the emergence of local learning ecosystems with new purposes for education and with new practices. So purposes helping young people flourish, often in conditions of extreme adversity, but bringing new techniques, multiple provision of education, shared leadership, innovation. So the report we're launching today tells that story, learning ecosystems in the global south, in Latin America, in Africa, in Indonesia, in India. And it also marks the emergence of a remarkable community of leaders. You'll meet some of them, as Olivier said, in a few minutes' time. But these are the people who are trialing, deepening, amplifying, advocating for a new approach to education, an approach from which I hope, and my colleagues hope, the global north will listen and learn. 3 organizations have come together to make all of this possible. The Global Education Leaders Program, which Valerie Hannon and I co-chair with amazing support from Rosie Clayton, our chief researcher and writer. Dream a Dream in India, Vishal Talreja, and LearningPlanet Institute, where Olivier and I are this morning here in Paris with a team of people who pushed this through over the last 12, 18 months. And we've been generously supported by a number of funding organizations, of whom I'm delighted to see Porticus on this call this morning. We do believe that the ecosystems you will hear about today are a breakthrough in the way that education is done in the 21st century. We hope you'll enjoy the conversation you're coming into here and that you'll take an active part.
The report, exploring local learning ecosystems in the global south, pathways to thriving children everywhere, or to every child thriving for every child. Sorry, is about to be released, but I'm turning to Valerie and towards Valerie and Rosie, who will be giving us a presentation of the key highlights of this report. Thank you very much, Valerie and Rosie.
Thank you, Olivier, and hello to everybody. It's an absolute honor to be in the room with you all, and looking across the tiles on my screen, I can see some very remarkable practitioners here. Now, I have been sternly told that I must not overstep our time. And of course, it's incredibly important that your voices come into the room. But we think it's important too, to try to give you a sense of the flow of the findings and the argument, the architecture, if you like, of the report, so that you can have a sense of what value, I hope we have added some, what value we've added to the work of these extraordinary practitioners. We have turned our study, global ecosystems in the global south. And I'm aware that that's a term which is something of a blunt instrument, and that some people might find it odd. We really mean circumstances in low and middle income countries of considerable adversity, which are not faced for the most part by communities of those in the global north. So I'm going to utter the dreaded words that I'm going to share my screen and give you a sense of the findings of our report. And there it is. And as Michael indicated, importantly, I think at the beginning of this meeting, the context of this work is a growing belief that what we're looking at here is a paradigm shift, a considerable refocusing on a new purpose for education globally, as highlighted by the UN recently at the summit last year in 2022, and I'm sure that will be center stage in the next summit in 2023 in September. And that places human flourishing or thriving as a central purpose. What's the argument for saying that? Well, that the old model's exhausted. It's actually exacerbating rather than solving our problems. It will never, never meet the challenges of the vast number of children facing profound adversity. And if you doubt that, do look at the Brookings report, I Wait 100 Years. And places the question, if human flourishing becomes our purpose, then what are the parameters, what are the contours of the new paradigm that's needed? Who's going to be involved? What is taught and learned? And how is this approached? And at this time, God knows we badly need bold, brave ideas about those issues, and particularly bold, brave ideas about the leadership of it. And that is what our report looks at. So, let me move this on. We've put thriving, the notion of human flourishing, at the centre. And I want to make very clear that what emerged from this study of ecosystems in the global south was that there's a variety of conceptions and understanding about what that entails. What, after all, is your understanding of a good life? And here we quote 3 of the participants in our study, giving very different kind of foci, I think. One from India, for a child to thrive, it's about finding that balance of growth, and not just limiting it to economic growth. Someone balancing self, family, society, environment, and being able to contribute positively in all these aspects. That's thriving. Catalina Kottuke put it in a different terms. Thriving is the capacity to take good decisions in the social, economic, and political spheres. So the emphasis there on the capacity to take good decisions. But I want to end with Franco, who's on the call. Franco's very significant and insightful thought here, which is in that their work in Ancash was not to impose or propose a given vision of thriving, but to help co-design that with the Ancash people, or whatever context you're working in. Find out what their emerging vision is in their context, with their history and with the circumstances that they face. And we think that's a vitally important insight. The second thing I want to emphasize, I think, arising from this report, is that when we talk about adversity, that's to say, the kind of those who write in this area, quite often adversity is conceived of as being poverty. And of course, poverty is so often behind many of the circumstances of adversity, but it manifests in different ways. And sometimes poverty is not front and center. We list there some of the forms of adversity that we encountered from our interviewees. And you will see that not all of them are directly the result of poverty, though clearly poverty is sometimes a factor. I've picked out 2. One, around misogyny and sexual violence and abuse. And another, the effects of environmental degradation and the climate crisis, which will be affecting so many communities and not directly brought about by poverty itself. So these contextual issues, the nature of adversity which young people tragically are facing, is fundamental to thinking about what different kinds of responses we need to make through the tool, the great power of education, but not education that's been currently practiced. And as Michael set out, we think ecosystems have a vital role to play. Why? Because they offer these 5 superpowers, if you like. The diversity of forms that they can take. There isn't a single model of the school with a curriculum chopped up into academic disciplines, a given variety of people involved, set out and prescribed. They're capable of optimizing assets, sometimes sequestered assets in the community, which often are overlooked. They present the capacity for agility and dynamic adaptability. They can be at any kinds of scale, very small scale, a tiny community, or right across huge systems, as we're witnessing in Delhi. And they are fundamentally contextualized to the nature of the adversity, the ambitions for thriving of the community. So, selection of cases, which my colleague Rosie will talk about in a minute, do 2 things, and these were our criteria, really. They manifest new learning purposes. They are around thriving based on a strong values base, particularly the issue of equity, which all of our colleagues saw as fundamental to a thriving planet. And they model new ways of working and leading. They are in the forefront of setting out what a new paradigm for learning might look like. And that's made possible by the ecosystemic approach. So let me hand over to Rosie now to give you a sense of the case studies, where they were drawn from, and how we filtered down to look in some depth at a smaller number. Rosie.
Thank you, Valerie. Welcome, everybody. This slide really gives a flavour, I guess, of the breadth of the different sort of locations that we were looking at. And it was, as kind of Valerie said, I guess I want to maybe talk a little bit about how no ecosystem is the same. There is not one model, there is not one form. As we go through today, you'll hear from different leaders doing slightly different things. But we essentially applied, I guess, a set of broad criteria under those 2 headings that Valerie mentioned, and went through a series of sort of interviewing and kind of desk-based research to come to find these 11 that are highlighted in the report. And the case studies in the report go into quite a bit of depth into visions for thriving, the specific adversities that they're trying to look at, strategies for developing learning ecosystems, and critically some of the practices that underpin the learning and the sort of skills development that they enable for the young people who are a part of the kind of ecosystemic approach. And that's, I guess, the thing, each look and feel very different in pursuit of those bold ambitions. Valerie, if you wouldn't mind moving to the next slide. I might talk a little bit about the sort of pedagogical approaches that underpin learning for thriving within the learning ecosystems that we looked at. I think this is really important because people often think of learning ecosystems, I guess, at 2 different levels. One is the organizational form that they take. So how are ecosystems organized in terms of networks of partners and stakeholders and others that contribute to supporting learners? But what does the actual experience of a learning ecosystem feel like for a learner? These 4 pictures are from 4 of our different case studies. Sociopreneur in Indonesia, Delhi, I think Ancash, and Fundación Mi Sangre. And some of the key pedagogies we've seen or learning experiences, I guess, range from arts-based pedagogies and expressive practices that are used to help with peace building and structured dialogue in really interesting ways. We've seen empathy-based pedagogies, which are really, really interesting. Reframing of the role as teachers, as facilitators. Social emotional learning came up a lot, particularly thinking about some of those adversities that Valerie mentioned, really helping equip young people to navigate, these really traumatic contexts of adversity that they're living within. In Delhi, we have the sort of happiness curriculum, which is based around sort of mindfulness and really helping kind of ground young people in that kind of broader context as well. Entrepreneurship education features quite frequently, technical and workforce development skills, as well as obviously foundational literacies and language development and building kind of mentoring as well. So it was really, heartening to kind of start to try and isolate some of those particular learning models and experiences that young people were receiving within these ecosystems. And to do this effectively, I really like the phrase building a sort of ecology of support around a young person, a community, a family, a school, whatever the sort of unit of changes that we might see. And I like this quote in the middle from Maria Brown Perez, the Minister of Education in Ecuador. And I think this comes up time and time again when we talk about learning ecosystems in different contexts. The formal education system cannot solve everything alone. You know, it takes an ecosystem, takes a village to raise children, to raise families. And that really is front and center when we think about, I guess, the form and function of ecosystems and the networks around them. The only other thing that I wanted to mention really was that there's a huge diversity of entry points when you're thinking about, you know, I'm really interested in this idea of learning ecosystems. How do I start, or where do I start? And we saw different types of organizations and entities and communities coming forward to really set these up through the case studies that we looked at. So it could be, you know, university and higher education partners, for example, AIM in South Africa, doing this very effectively. It could be through the informal learning space, through museums, galleries, out of school extracurricular programs. You know, that's the starting point. It could be through policy and government, in fact, coming together to start to build out ecosystems. And teacher training and teacher development was another sort of key area that we saw as an entry route. But, you know, these organizations or communities are then actively building strong networks and alliances to, I guess, orchestrate and manage, very much dependent on the infrastructures in the local context. So I think that's quite important. Oh, yeah, and foundations, actually, that's the other thing to mention. Foundations play kind of a critical role in this too. And this also speaks a little bit to the relationship, which we delve into the report, between kind of learning ecosystems and the government and the formal system. Again, there's no one model. In some ecosystems, the government is taking quite an active role and often a leading role. In others, not that involved at the moment, but that relationship might evolve over time. But I think it's kind of important when we think about the politics of education transformation, which Valerie has also written something on recently. You know, how do we bring policymakers into this conversation? But help them see the value and understand the value and impact that we are kind of creating, which requires new metrics and new understanding of what success or progress looks like. Back to you, Valerie.
Thanks very much, Rosie. So what could we as a research team draw from all of the richness of these case studies to pull out some broad understandings and generalizations without, as I say, losing that richness? So what we're seeing here is new models and strategies. And I want to start off with the one which came up time and time again, the notion of the centrality of trust and relationships. None of these forms of working, these forms of ecosystems, can get off the ground without incredible investment in building trust and in building relationships. And what a contrast that is so often to the kinds of formal hierarchical systems that young people encounter. And I can't stress enough how many times our interviewees and the participants in the study talked about the effort that needed to go in over time in building this form of trust with everyone who needs to be involved. Secondly, the concept of changing the narrative about what education is for and setting a completely new standard about what counts as quality and what it is that we're aiming at and how we know we're getting there. And that is a very subtle business, how you go about changing the very vocabulary that we use for talking about learning, successful learning and education, overcoming some of the assumptions that have been long embedded in our narratives about learning. Clearly, we need to be building, as our participants do, capacity in many actors. Heaven knows it's hard enough to adequately build the capacity of the professional learning workforce, and many of the people on this call devote their lives to doing that. But now we are talking about many more actors being involved and thinking about how they need to be enabled to develop personally and in a professional sense, a quasi-professional sense, to make a contribution. And this is life-enhancing, by the way. Clearly, the very essence of an ecosystem is about alliances and about coalition building. And we're not very good at it. We have to think about how you go about doing that, not on the basis of status or hierarchical power, but on the basis of trust and relationships. And we will get nowhere unless we are clear that we need to advance a whole new set of metrics and a whole new set of new uses for data. If we just simply elevate the old academic outcomes, then important though those are, they give an imperfect picture and will constrain what it is that we do. And they are nowhere near being capable of capturing the impact that we need to make on adversity, and new uses for data. So we talk in the report about, yes, accountability, yes, demonstrating impact, yes, persuading governments and indeed funders to pursue new avenues, but critically, data for the participants so that they can understand the kinds of impact that they're making and learn from those data to think about how they adaptively shift their practice and move on in an agile way to different kinds of approaches. And as Rosie just outlined, those approaches are rich, are varied, diverse, and they need data to help us learn and take them forward. So I think those 5 strategies are critical in being able to take this new model to something which is enormously powerful and capable of being understood much more broadly. So where do we end? We end with a challenge and with an opportunity. We hope that with this report, we're part of the effort of telling the story, getting the story out there and getting people thinking about, you know what, we can think beyond the challenges of the formal system. We can advance this work in a way that actually is about our fundamental purpose as humans. And it's an inspiring vision. Everyone who comes across these ecosystems understands the importance, indeed the centrality of what they're doing, not just for individual learners, but for whole communities and indeed our planet. The challenge of developing capacities is huge, but we have a fantastic community of people here gathered, and indeed colleagues that we've worked with in the global north, to think about how those capacities are developed and how we can make that more systemic and systematic. And finally, we hope to contribute towards engaging more policymakers, indeed more people involved in the political work, to think about what kind of policy framework would be necessary. And yes, that will involve quality assurance too, not simply inspirational thinking. But those policy frameworks are in their infancy, they're crude at the moment, and we want to, through telling the story, through telling a different narrative, inspire people working in this field to think about what are the enabling conditions that we could bring about to make these things fly, because their potential is immense. We encourage you to read the report. Please take a look. A lot of people have contributed enormously to it and shared most generously, and we're really grateful to them. So thank you for that. And Michael, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Valerie. I'm jumping in. Yeah, we stop sharing. So just to give an idea, thank you again for the presentation. We'll come and discuss it at length. The report is available now online on the LearningPlanet Alliance website. We can put the link in the chat, and you'll be able to come and download it. So that's something for the complete report. Some of you as speakers received it. Now we have a pleasure of having representative of various learning ecosystems that are featured in the report. And I will ask in turn Ross Hall to start, because I know he has to leave very soon. And thank you, Ross, for being here with us, by making a few comments about learning ecosystem, this report, why is it so important, notably with Jacobs Foundation involvement in Ghana. Then I will go and ask Dessy to present the work in Indonesia, then Franco from Peru, and then Runa Khan from Bangladesh, if she's with us. And then we'll go for a round of other discussions. Ross, the mic is yours.
Thanks so much, Olivier, and thanks, Michael, Rosie, and Valerie for putting this report together. It's a really valuable addition to the growing literature on learning ecosystems. And I think more than that, it really hopefully will be pushing this new paradigm that you mentioned, Valerie, which personally I think is absolutely fundamental to our well-being as a species and to the well-being of the planet. I'll be very quick, and I just thought it might be helpful to give you a sense of what we're doing at the Jacobs Foundation in regard to learning ecosystems. We've built the idea of learning ecosystems into our vision and strategy for 2030. And we're currently in the process of trying to implement processes through which thriving learning ecosystems come about in 4 countries: in the Ivory Coast and Ghana, in Colombia, and also in Switzerland, which is where we're located. And just a quick note here, and I think this definition that we use of a thriving learning ecosystem touches on many of the points that you raised, Valerie. We describe a thriving learning ecosystem as a diverse and trustful community, working and learning together, using evidence together to ensure that every child is learning to thrive together. And the idea here around thriving for us is that thriving is a dynamic process of learning to care for oneself, for others, and planet together. So we touch there very centrally on the idea of interconnectedness. This architecture of processes that we're putting in place, and I think this is really important. We're trying to, and I don't know that we've got the language right here at all yet, but on the one hand, what we're trying to do is create an architecture, or almost an institutional architecture in systems, but critically recognizing that these are not fixed pieces of architecture, but rather processes, because of course, central to a learning ecosystem is the idea that it is highly dynamic and emergent, unlike the conception of an education system, which is often thought of as very machine-like and rather static. So this is an architecture of processes which involves three pieces. At the level of the child, it's a community, or community of change is what we call these in Ghana and in Colombia. This community is woven together by a team. That team is headed notionally by the formal administrator within the education system at the district or sub-district level. So you have a kind of a formalized team weaving together the wider community. And with that community, they are interrogating their current system to say what's working, what's not working, who's doing what even. What does the evidence tell us that we should keep and that we should change? The community is also envisioning what they want to create. And from that discussion, they're starting to plan where they want to go, what are they going to prioritize. Then they implement the plan, and using data and evidence, they iterate as they go. So this is a very dynamic transformation process led by a small team and involving the whole community at the level of the child. And we don't know the perfect size of that community yet, but there is a hypothesis that you can do this at the district level, so multi-school level. So that's at the root of this architecture. And that really is the place where we see these thriving learning ecosystems coming about. In support of that, we believe it's really essential that there is help coming down from the national level, from at least within the education system, but probably from other ministries also, including health, nutrition, gender equity, etc., whatever those ministries are. And those supports are twofold in our hypothesis, one of which is an evidence laboratory. So this is an institution at the national level which is generating evidence, synthesizing evidence, and helping those change communities at the learning ecosystem level apply that evidence in practice. It's also helping to create an enabling policy environment through the application of evidence. So it's operating at that national level to create an enabling policy environment and supporting these change communities to create their thriving learning ecosystems. And then the third piece of the architecture is a co-funding mechanism, recognizing that there needs to be money injected into these change communities in order to create thriving learning ecosystems. That money is often not available, or it's extremely fragmented, or it's not very systemically applied. And so we're creating pooled funding mechanisms which bring together government money with philanthropic money, and in some cases industry money, to support the implementation of the evidence laboratory with the change communities at the district level together. So this is what we're doing, applying this architecture. And then just very, very briefly, two other things. In order to progress the narrative, we also commissioned the Economist Impact Group to prepare a report on learning ecosystems. And we've also worked with an organization called Nexio to create a tool which we're hoping to roll out very soon, which will help people look at their work through the lens of learning ecosystems. And I'd be happy to share that with you when that's available. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ross, for your contribution today, for sharing all these perspectives and news and programs. Now I'm going to ask Dessy to tell us about the perspective from Sociopreneur Indonesia. Please, Dessy.
Thank you so much, Olivier, Valerie, Michael, Vishal, Rosie, and Catherine. It's a pleasure to be here. And the first of all is like to learn from other ecosystem leaders. It's really amazing in here. So we are in Sociopreneur Indonesia. Actually, we started 2013, but that we start as a students club. Then we focus on how to develop creativity and use innovative ways to solve the problems in surrounding. But throughout the time, then we just realized that the problems in education is complex. And then, so that's why in 2015, then we started to engage more stakeholders, and we coined what we call it responsible ecosystem. A responsible ecosystem is like our visions of the future society where everyone will take a role to improve their surrounding. So it's mean like no matter who you are the one who will solve the problem in your surrounding. You cannot just give it to the government. You cannot just give it to NGO schools. You cannot do that, but you have to take a role on it. So that's why we coined the word responsible ecosystem. And then we start to provide a platform where we engage all stakeholders. We engage with the government, CSO, we engage with universities, we engage with K-12 and everyone that call ecosystem. And then we not want to just, because Indonesia is very big, we have more than 600 tribes, 1,300 languages, then no model that fits all. So who going to solve the problem? So you are the one who can take the role and solve the problem in your context. So that's the idea why we developed the responsible ecosystem. So since 2013 until today, we already have more than 30,000 learners, and they already created more than 2,000 initiative movements. And also it's like they create their own innovation to solve the problems in the surrounding. Indonesia have more than 500 cities. We already work with more than 12% of the cities, but it's still a big problem. I mean, like Indonesia, if we one part of Indonesia in another part of Indonesia, that's different context. So it's mean like what I want to say in here, like you cannot solve the problem with just with one single model without understanding the context. So that's why here what we want to say is like, you cannot just say it's your job, it's my job, your duty, your responsibility, but we start to ask all stakeholders, how are you going to involve? So that's the way we always bring how we develop the ecosystem. We bring all the stakeholders to have a common sense, common awareness, and then start with the awareness, then how we're going to work together. And it works in Indonesia. And you can say like we have a model in Sumatra, but you cannot use the same model in Java because that's totally different. And then we talk about the 11 cases from different parts of the world. That maybe it worked in India, but it doesn't mean it's going to work in Indonesia. So who's going to solve that? People in that context will be able to solve it if we improve the skills of them. So that's why the things that what we want to bring it here is like to make the government realize you have to include all stakeholders when we talk about education. And then we have to include all stakeholders in your grand design about education. And we are not talking about education for schools, but we're talking about education for life. So that's what we are doing. So what we are doing currently is like we start to develop our life database, because we use the model of ripple effect. Once you already engage with us, we encourage you to create your initiative, your innovation, your movement, and then we'll affect all Indonesia in the next 10 years. Because we have we are vision in 2035. So all over Indonesia, we will be a part of the responsible ecosystem. So it's a big visions, but we believe we can achieve that. Thank you so much.
Dessy, thank you very much. I'm trying not to make comments and to just do my role as a moderator. And now we are welcoming Franco. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, something like this, in Peru. Franco, please let us know about your perspective on learning ecosystems and the incredible work you're doing on the ground.
Thank you, Oliver. Great to see you all. Very, very grateful to be here. Our learning ecosystem is called Ancash, and it is a rural area in Peru. It is a district of which we have 220 districts across the country. This is one of them, where around 15,000 kids go to school every day, facing, as Valerie shared, enormous levels of adversity. And Efecto Ancash is a coalition that now has more than 20 organizations, from the private sector, the civil sector, the public sector, and at all levels of leadership, and including research and media organizations as well. And I think what's special whenever we engage with them is that we are trying to coalesce around a notion of seeing the potential of our kids in a different way, you know? And we're asking ourselves constantly, what if we reshaped what we aim for and do it together in a very deliberate way? And what I mean by that is that when you think of the life of a student, and I really love the word thriving, when I think about, you know, all kids in my country, you know, even including my daughter, if you give a serious thought to that and what comes with their life, what we're trying to envision together is that every one of our children here can have the opportunity to be not only a responsible worker, which I think is, in Peru at least, part of a very dominant narrative, that the whole reason why they spend 18,000 hours in school is, you know, this is what my students tell me, no? To earn a salary, to be part of the economy, which is, of course, part of life. But what about if we gave some serious leadership, collective leadership, to helping our students also thrive as a loving family member? Because that's an enormous and important part of life. Or what if we, for example, also reshaped our collective leadership, the way things work in Ancash, so that they can also become change makers? You know, there are enormous challenges for humanity, and if you see our children as potential change makers, then would the educational system need to work differently? Will we need to gather data differently? Will policy or the narrative, how we speak about students and with students, will that change on an everyday basis? And so that is what we're thriving for, with a combination of a bottom-up and top-down approach. This is, you know, shared language across the world, and we also use it as well here. So the bottom-up approach is mostly about, you know, finding leaders and helping those leaders be visible in that community, right? And we do that through leadership programs, but through many other different ways. And what I mean by leaders, I mean teachers, I mean school principals, I mean parent leaders that are doing incredible things to support their kids and leading new programs, student leaders themselves, because once we adopted this view, you go to every city in Peru and probably in the world, and you will find a group of kids that they want to be part of the change. They have this seed in them to be part of this new effort. And that bottom-up approach, basically, we have tailored programs for all these roles, leadership roles, as we understand them, that hold a piece of the puzzle. And with them, they learn new tools, global tools. We're very rigorous around how we help them develop themselves into their best selves for their own ecosystem. And we try to hold also unlikely meetings between them. Unlikely because in Peru, at least, it is not likely that student leaders will have an honest and horizontal dialogue, for example, with school principals, no? But we try to join them to build trust, to build empathy, for all of us to understand that each of us hold a piece of the puzzle to success, to successfully diagnose the problem, to successfully design solutions, to successfully co-evaluate them, co-implement them, and then evolve them. And that's the bottom-up approach. And so far, we've had hundreds of leaders from all these roles, and it's really magical to see them in a room together, discovering, for all of us, it's been a journey, what it means to work in diversity, and what it means for each kind of role to grow into the best possible piece of the puzzle to then go to implement. And then the other part is the top-down, right? And the top-down means that we work also with district leaders and regional leaders, in our case, and we say, okay, let's build trust as well. They are also part of different kinds of professional development, but also of these spaces of trust and dialogue where things get really real, you know? Away go with trust and empathy, the political dialogues, and that is what we've seen. And we go into the deep listening between each other. And that is the seed to really observe what has been going on in public policy for so long, sometimes unchanged. And then say, hey, what if we have that new purpose, and if we're seeing, you know, in the field, local leaders actually embodying that new purpose, if we're seeing students growing as new change makers, as loving family members, growing not only academically, but that it is possible in this context to grow in their socio-emotional wealth, for example, and in their citizenship capacities, when the community starts seeing that, they say, well, then maybe we should shift key policies, right? Because for 50 years, for example, we haven't been gathering data around socio-emotional health or human flourishing. We haven't been gathering data about if students are participating, to which degree do they feel as leaders, and what is happening with the school environment that facilitates that. And so through the top-down approach that we combine with the bottom-up, key policies, evaluation, curriculum, talent development of teachers and principals, incentives, long-term planning, student leadership policies, they're coming together and they resonate because of the bottom-up approach. Ultimately, just to end, I think that this is about, for us, discovering that communities have the capacity to self-disrupt in a tolerable way, in an inspiring way. And we're already thankfully seeing results at the district-wide level, which is incredibly encouraging, both in mental health, in academic outcomes. And it's very hard work, but it's worth it. And we see that it generates a new kind of success.
Thank you very much, Franco. As Catherine is putting in the chat, there are more videos from the different learning ecosystems which are already available. There's one from Runakan, who could have been with us. I'm not sure I'm seeing her. There's some from the team in South Africa, notably with AIM. So please, you can also check these videos. There will be more coming. And now I would like to have the next 15 minutes maximum, so 3-4 minutes each if possible, with other practitioners and experts in the field of learning ecosystems, and also supporters of the program. So I will ask in order to Alex from Teach for All, then Nita from Porticus, and then Pavel from Global Education Futures to react what they have been hearing from the key highlights on the report and just share their thoughts on these matters and their interest in the field. So please, and I think you know quite well Franco, Alex, so there's probably a link there. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks so much, Olivier, and everybody else. I'll just share some quick thoughts in response. So yeah, thanks to all of the effort that's gone into the amazing work featured in the report and the report itself. I think it's very powerful. And I just wanted to say really how much resonance I found in it with the work that's going on across the Teach for All network. So we are a network of organizations in 60 countries who are recruiting, training and mobilizing leaders within education. We have about 100,000 of those leaders working in those 60 countries worldwide as teachers, school leaders, policymakers, social entrepreneurs, and so on. And all of them are broadly doing this work of trying to strengthen and nurture local learning ecosystems, although we use slightly different language. So I just wanted to talk about that a little bit. So in the report, there's talk about thriving. We at Teach for All talk about growing student leadership. So we're talking about growing the leadership of students so they can build a better future for themselves and all of us. And I think it's, again, like a very similar ethic. The report focuses on working with children who face adversity. And our network is focused on mobilizing leaders who work with children in the most disadvantaged communities, both in urban and rural settings, in the countries where those leaders are operating. So again, there's a great resonance there. We also see this ecosystemic view of how to tackle the biggest challenges in education. We think that how kids do and whether they become leaders is dictated not just by what happens in classrooms and schools, but by a huge array of complex factors throughout their communities, societies, and wider systems. So we completely see it in the same way there. In terms of change, we think about change according to two big pillars. On the one hand, you have solutions that are a bit more technical, new policies, teacher training approaches, edtech solutions. And on the other hand, you have to mobilize people and their collective leadership. So people working together from diverse backgrounds at all levels of an ecosystem. And it's the interplay of those two things, great solutions and mobilized people, that will really bring about change. And if you just have one and not the other, we think that you don't get the change that you want to bring about. And then, in terms of the drivers of stronger ecosystems, the report talks about trust, public narratives, capacity building, coalitions, and data. In our own work, we talk about, and I think it's very similar, building trust, distributing power, better collaboration, getting systems learning, building capability. So again, there's like huge similarities between the way that we're seeing this stuff. And I think all of this opens up a couple of things. So we have two big bets as a network for nurturing learning ecosystems. Bet one is, as Franco's talked about, growing the leadership of people in these ecosystems. So developing the leadership of teachers, developing the leadership of school leaders, developing the leadership of parents, developing the leadership of students to kind of build that leadership capacity, because those leaders at the local level will know what is needed to be done to strengthen the ecosystem. And the second big bet is working out what it means to strengthen the enabling conditions of a learning ecosystem. How do you nurture an ecosystem, building relationships, developing purpose, distributing power, building power across a system? So we think about that as well. And we have two big questions at the moment. One is, how do you develop purpose and collective commitment across an ecosystem? How do you broaden that beyond like your current realm of influence? That's one big question we have. And secondly, how do you enlist a critical mass of leaders within that particular ecosystem beyond who you kind of have in your immediate movement or set of connections? So those are our two big learning questions. And then my two big questions for this group and for this conversation. Number one is, like, how do we feel about Is there some kind of creative tension in the knowledge that we want to do this work fast, we want to leapfrog, but also we probably know that the work of ecosystem regeneration takes time, building trust takes time. It's like, how do we live with that creative tension? And then secondly, as a global community, how do we strengthen our approaches to global learning? How do we create more inclusive approaches to global learning that enable us to have some shared effect in amplifying, accelerating, expanding the impact of this kind of approach and how we learn from one another?
Thank you very much, Alex. Great question. Do not hesitate to put your question in the chat. I just asked Katrin to capture them, but I don't know if otherwise you can put them again so that we discuss them. So now I will turn to Nita. Porticus has been a real great support in all the work we've been doing on this local learning ecosystem. So Nita, we will hear from you. Then, as I told you, I will ask Pavel. And I have Michael next to me and Vishal and saying, oh, there's Olli-Pekka there. So Olli-Pekka, if you kindly think about something you would like to share and your perspective, which will come from another angle, we will invite you. And I will keep something like 20 minutes for real interactions between all of us before Vishal gives the final words to this 90-minute session. So Nita, please.
Thank you, and great to be part of this group. I think report is a comprehensive and an insightful exploration of strategies that are being adopted across learning ecosystems. I think reading the report, there are 4 reflections, and listening to these conversations, there are 4 reflections for me, and I think very critical also from Porticus's own lens of our education work. One is, this acknowledgement and meeting the children and youth where they are and aspirationally on that spectrum of thriving. So be there where they are. And I think the second thing that strikes me is the onus of action is on the ecosystem. So, how do we all come together in this service of enabling thriving for all? And we being part of it. So it's not external, it's all of us being part of it. So, how do people, players, systems kind of come together in this narrative? Third thing that strikes me across reading across all the ecosystems is, the contextual relevance and appreciating diversity within and around it. So diversity of players that comes around, diversity within ecosystems and across ecosystems. I think that stands out to me. And fourth thing that I want to leave this with the group is, the change that we talk about, change external and change within and change internal as organizations, as ecosystems, as individuals. What does that invitation to change is? I think these 4 things strike to me while reading the report across ecosystems. And I feel it's imperative for all of us to kind of come together in this journey of bringing this narrative together. And I'll pause here for more discussions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Nita. Pavel, may you jump in and share with us some of your reflections. Thank you very much.
Yes. Hello, colleagues. So first of all, a big round of applause for this, no doubt, really important and hopefully to be catalytic report that will really shape the thinking of policymakers and decision makers around the world, especially in the global south. And what inspires me about this report is that sometimes this ecosystemic transition is seen as let's say, a toy for rich countries. They're resource endowed. And what you show in the report that it's the opposite. Learning ecosystems are needed where, let's say, the adversity is the highest, where the conditions are not favorable, and where the trust substitutes well-developed institutions. And that is why we need this ecosystemic transition to happen all over the world. And it will be community-driven, it will be movement-driven, it will be a grassroots process rather than the one that is established from the top down. And we at Global Education Futures are big enthusiasts of the topic of learning ecosystems. We did a number of reports on this topics in the past. And I would like to make a few comments. So one of them is that actually what we have discovered, while it is true that thriving is at the center of learning ecosystem of the global south in many cases, it is also at the center of ecosystems of the global north. So it's quite a universal approach. But I think in the global north, it's often seen that the condition for thriving of humans is brought by economies. So many of these global north ecosystems are kind of mediating the goal by saying we need decent jobs, we need to create technological innovation. For that, we need learning ecosystem, and then that will produce thriving. Whereas I think it's a right path to really put the thriving of people themselves, learners themselves, at the center of processes. So this is where the message from Global South becomes so important for the whole world. Second thing that I think is there, it's also like a hidden message of this report, is that learning ecosystems have to think of themselves as drivers of some important societal transformations or social evolution. And in fact, we see so many challenges ahead of us in our collective futures, both existential challenges of ecological nature, of technological nature. Big question is, how can we make our communities and our societies future-proof? And one of the answers is actually the learning ecosystems, is that trust, this focus on thriving, this discovery of human purpose. The work of Vishal in particular, I would say, is one of the ways how you, by making young learners thrive, you also make them future ready and be able to contribute to the transformation of economies, to the transformation of society, of the nation. That is the pathway forward for me. Third thing that was mentioned in the comment, and I think this is really particularly important, is something that ecosystem, the word of ecosystem comes from biology originally. And that's no random that we're using this word, because the inspiration is indeed coming from nature. And by applying models of ecosystem, we're sort of beginning to relearn our connection with natural systems. And we kind of synchronize ourselves, because in the industrial world, which is kind of mechanical, we begin to act as part of this huge social machinery. Whereas we need to relearn to be the part of this large planetary organism that is our planet. And by reconnecting ourselves to planetary processes, to the processes of biosphere, we are learning ecosystems are a place where this is happening. And part of the approach is actually how do we learn with nature when we are doing this. So that has to be one of the, let's say, processes in the learning ecosystem dynamic. I think something important was pointed by a number of speakers. Ross explicitly spoke about this, is that when we discuss the proliferation of learning ecosystems model, we need to look at the ways they are funded and the ways they are governed. Because this is a different model than, let's say, models of the past. We need to find models of funding and models of governance that are kind of complementary, aligned with the nature of this ecosystemic multi-stakeholder approach. And for example, what Ross was mentioning, this pooled approach, I think this is very representative of how we need to think about funding of learning ecosystem. I think this aspect really deserves our collective attention. This is one of the things we need to continue to study, because without that aspect, we will not see how we can proliferate learning ecosystems. Last point I want to make is that I think in the world around us, we see so many tendencies, and some of them are very inspiring and some of them are very dark. And the future ahead of us is not, let's say, guaranteed the collective survival and thriving of the humanity. So the question is, how do we proliferate these models that are kind of amplifying our potential to survive and thrive in the 21st century and beyond? Learning ecosystems is part of that. But for me, it is important that we don't only observe the conditions, but we create these conditions. So I think part of the story for us needs to be that we learn how to amplify the potential of the teams that are doing this. And I call it ecosystemic acceleration. So something like they do with startups, they kind of accelerate and put them on a specially scaffolded path towards creation of more successful companies. We need to do the same with ecosystems, and that is one of the things I think we need to move from research to research in action, and that is to me the next step of this work. Thank you very much.
Pavel, thank you very much for your contribution, your insights. We are going to start to have a conversation. So if you want to say a word, to react, comment, whether you're a speaker, one of a researcher, whether you are just participants, I see plenty of great colleagues and great practitioners in the room here. Please raise your hand, and I will make sure that you have time for some short comments if possible, or more questions. But I'm turning to Olli-Pekka if she's here, and if she could just signal with raising her hand whether she would be willing to say a few words and react to what she's been hearing just now. That's with a strong recommendation from both Vishal and Michael. Olli, do you hear me?
I do hear you. Do you hear me?
Yes, thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you. Yes, excellent views and very interesting discussion ongoing. I'm coming from this discussion with the experience of kind of being in charge of supporting a learning ecosystem in the Northern Hemisphere, in a very kind of a special country when it comes to education, that is Finland. And I would like to say a few words about my experiences with that, and also in connection what I'm doing in today, in my today's role as the Director General of International Baccalaureate, how we're trying to make a functioning learning ecosystem on the global level. And what does that mean? My kind of points that I would like to raise up is that, first of all, I think it's extremely important to make the system visible to all the different actors that are contributing to the system, so that they know that they belong to a larger entity that is trying to reach certain things together. The second thing, I think what is so important is that there is somebody who is taking the role of a system convener, that has that role and has also the kind of trust among the other actors that that body or whatever it is can bring people and the different actors together to start building that shared purpose of what could be achieved together. What's the purpose of education in that ecosystem? And that's a very challenging role. First of all, it's something that it doesn't kind of happen automatically, but you have to invest and create processes and roles for that kind of a system convener to be able to function. You cannot manage an ecosystem, but you can support its work. And that means that you have to constantly feed the trust in the system. That system conveners should not have a kind of a strong agenda of its own, because it needs to be in charge of the kind of trust building and the purpose seeking process that is happening in that ecosystem. And that requires a very humble approach from the system convener. And maybe the kind of last thing, because I've kind of been in that position in Finland of building that shared purpose among different actors in different levels of the system and in different roles, it's very central that you kind of have that shared purpose, but then kind of also making it clear that what are the different roles that everyone is doing, moving towards that shared purpose. And Valerie Hannon was stressing very strongly the trust issue, and I would like to do it too. And that trust should be something that goes all the way to the students. It's not only the actors who are supporting the learning happening there, but it's also the students that should be trusted as part of that system, actually being the core of that system. And maybe the final point I would like to make is that in the system, what is important is what happens between the different actors. What's the quality of the interaction that is happening? And there, it's not only about different actors being in roles, but important and valuable things start to happen when those in those interactions, we start to see each other as humans. We see that that person in that organization or that authority is not a kind of a faceless role, but it's a human person who has challenges of its own and also good intentions to move to the right direction. And that's the thing that kind of I would say a flourishing ecosystem is based on.
Olli-Pekka, thank you very much for your contribution and the perspective from Finland. Really, notably, very much appreciate the space and the trust and that you give to the youth, but many other aspects. There are 3 people who have been raising their hands or writing to me, so I will, and please take something like 1 minute for your comments or contribution. Karen wrote to me first, please, then there's Teddy, and then there's Robin. So let's go like this, if you're right, Karen.
That's fine. Hi, everybody. My name is Karen Edge, and I am a Canadian living in England. I work at the Institute of Education. Thanks so much for the panel and the effort and the publication. It's brilliant. What I think is interesting from the work that we're doing specifically relates to sort of my history as a biologist. And I think ecosystems as a term is really helpful, but ecosystems are fundamentally not equal. So when you look at ecosystems, when you look at the notion of sort of survival of the fittest, you know, the strongest trees will grow the tallest. And it's really important, I think, to possibly accelerate the commitment to equity as we start talking about ecosystems more fully. I say that having spent a bit of time with my son watching, you know, increases of shark attacks, watching whales attack boats, looking at how the ecosystems of the oceans with the heating up of what's happening are starting to shift their dynamics. And without some specific intervention, if we start applying ecosystems as a looser term across our work, it can be a little possibly dangerous. The last thing I wanted to do is just point that there's been a new body of research coming out in organizational theory, looking at what are some of the metrics that are most important for organizational success. One is respect. And I think what we've seen in all of the case studies is that respect is fundamental, care is fundamental, but often if we apply an ecosystem framework, which often assumes that with the right conditions, everything will flourish in the right way. Michael and I were on a panel last week, and one of our colleagues, Curtis from class 13 in England, pointed out that one of the biggest dangers of ecosystems or talking about flourishing is that often we're not looking at the potential of everyone within that ecosystem to flourish the same way. So just to flag the equity point, to flag the respect point, and just to say thanks for all of the work that's been done. It's brilliant. And if at IOE we can ever be helpful, just reach out, and we are here on your team. Thanks.
So thank you, Karen. We will be connecting with everyone who wants to be joined and to further develop the initiative around the learning ecosystems. Teddy, you really wanted to react. I think notably we're listening to Olli and then Robin, and you can go immediately after Teddy if you want. You've made plenty of comments in the chat. That's great. So I see there's a lot of reaction on your side. Teddy, please go ahead.
Thanks so much. I'm very happy to be here. It's such an inspiring conversation. I'm learning so much from each one of you on the chat as well as in speaking about the report. I'm Teddy, representing Ecomanca. We're connecting gamification with social emotional learning, focusing on youth in vulnerable communities in Latin America onto social entrepreneurship journeys and self and collective leadership. I wanted to comment on Olli-Pekka's idea because I really believe that the basis of everything is basically having trust, building trust within yourself, trust within the people around you, trust in the community. And if we think of an ecosystem without the idea of trust, then it doesn't really work. And I feel that if the purpose of education is really change making, a transformation process from the self to the collective, then I believe that the actual vital element of building trust is really social emotional learning and the idea of self-empathy and of course collective empathy, because in the end everything starts from the idea of self-awareness that leads to basically self-trust and compassion, and then you also take this on the collective around, and it's about collective awareness and collective compassion. So the idea is how to actually connect the beneficiaries, the actual the youth, the teenagers, the kids, with actually believing that everything is actually there in their favor, and of course for them to actually see how that element of favor leads towards themselves taking action and becoming the leaders that we want them to be, the compassionate eco leaders that the world needs now. Thank you.
Thank you, Teddy. Yes, Robin.
Thanks, Olivier. So wonderful. It's an absolutely wonderful session, and Olli particularly just really loved what you were sharing. But what I wanted to raise is that even the learning ecosystem debate can really quickly become quite a technical debate unless we pause and take the time to go back to intent, and building off what both Karen and Teddy were saying, that the intent with which one steps into this kind of work is what will determine how it plays out. And so Olli, your statement about, okay, so how do the conveners work? The conveners are the people, I believe, who hold the highest self-examined intent for what they are hoping to achieve. And again, this conundrum between what is the big and what is the small, and how do they relate, and what lies in between them. And the intent speaks to the in-betweenness. So we work in this big, vast system, but until we're working at the inner level of examining our motivation, our belief systems, our longing for relationality and trust, and how we want to step into that, our willingness to make a positive assumption about others, and to work with when we actually have the uglier stuff coming through. It's really hard to step into the being of the learning ecosystem and not the planning or the making or the doing, but actually the energetic of it. Like, what is the intent that lies at the heart of moving towards relationality and trust? And Karen, I loved also what you said, that, what are our founding principles? So for me, they're always kindness, respect, and integrity. And until that sits at the heart of the learning ecosystem, it can easily flip into a connection or a kind of grouping that operates on different principles. So yeah, just bringing the intent into the conversation.
Robin, thank you very much. Vitaly, please, you want to jump in? We'll listen to you with great pleasure.
It's been wonderful listening to everyone speaking here, and I've gone through the report, but not all of it, but it's something that I'm doing at the moment. But when looking at the learning ecosystem, I'm looking at this amazing organization doing some amazing work wherever they are. And I'm looking at the common challenges that some of these organizations are facing, which one of them would be funding, scaling, and stuff. And I've been lucky enough for the last 3 years. AIM have been working on learning from other organizations, which is similar to what LearningPlanet is all about, like taking the learnings from other organizations and just be open-minded. And one of the things that we have learned is that in order to scale up with the organizations is that we need to find ways of letting go. Like for an example, we at AIM, we have the University of Venda here program, and the program is mentoring, but we don't have to be at the University of Venda forever. What we do is we equip the University of Venda students, and they lead the program, and we don't have to be part of it. And this goes for also with the issue of funding. Funding is one of the challenging things. I know a lot of people don't really like to talk about funding, but the issue of perpetual funding can also be quite a problem. Like most of the organizations shouldn't be existing anymore in effect, that if an organization which is meant to solve a problem exists for more than 100 years, that means the problem is either not going away purposefully, or someone is failing to solve the problem, or those kind of things. But we also need to look at, like, when we start these organizations, when we start intervening, equipping and stuff like that, what is the end game? They have to be like the end game. Like, what is do we need to exist for 100 years, 200 years? Do we, how do we work towards the end of the problem so that we don't have to exist anymore? And that's something that we have been exploring at AIM, and it's been quite interesting, because the more you look at it, the more you realize that it can be done. Just that a lot of people wouldn't really look at it, because what happens when the problem is gone is that you have no use. But the truth is, you do have use. You can focus on other problems as much as you were focusing on the previous problem, or you can just enjoy life and say problem solved, and so on. So, and with the issue of funding as well, we have looked at, like, how we run programs these days is that we look at existing structures, so that we don't necessarily look at the fund, but human resources and people who can actually offer the expertise without looking for money and stuff like that. But with that being said, the report is amazing, and I'm loving every bit of all the organizations putting the effort in there, and we are going to be learning a lot from what is written on that report. And since we are on the exploration phase in our organization, we are going to explore some of the learnings from these organizations and the learning ecosystem as a whole, and we'll keep you updated as well.
Thank you very much. You can watch a video from Venda University in partnership with AIM, which is already, in addition to reading the report, there's a lot there. We do work a lot with AIM across the world. We have a visit from the teams from Australia on Friday, so tomorrow afternoon in Paris here. Thank you for your comments. We have something like 10 minutes left, and Vishal, who has been participating very actively to the report, supporting it and contributing, and also representing learning ecosystems in India, in Delhi, will share with us some of the next steps and some of it what we would like to discuss and how we want to move forward. And then we should have a few more minutes. So if you still have questions or reactions, I see that Jordi has joined us a while ago. Anyone who wants to jump in is more than welcome. But Vishal, the floor is yours now.
Thank you, Oliver. Yeah, I'm just vociferously been taking notes with all the amazing reflections and insights that have been coming in, and looking at the interest of just this group around the idea of learning ecosystems for education transformation. We do believe that we have some plans for the next steps, which is really exciting. And as we were doing this study itself, we realized that there's so much more deeper that we can go, and so much more broader that we can go in this study, and continue to build this idea of learning ecosystems. So the research study definitely gave us a lot of encouragement that there is significant regional and global interest in learning ecosystems. And we intend to continue and build on this energy and momentum in the next phase of our work. While when we started the work, the focus was really just on a 1 year, 18-month study. But now we are moving towards that there is a lot more that we can do. Working also closely with 11 learning ecosystems and other regional and global players who are thinking around a learning ecosystems approach. We realized that there is a community that's emerging and we can build on this community. So the first step for us would be post the launch of this report, which we encourage you to download, read, spread the word around it. We'll focus on storytelling and awareness raising on the 11 learning ecosystems, and also more importantly, on our insights from the report from studying these learning ecosystems. We also want to create hubs of learning ecosystems in each of the 3 global south geographies. Again, what we saw is that while we featured a couple of learning ecosystems from each region, there are a lot more emergent learning ecosystems that we're beginning to see. Some at the initial stages, many at mature levels, many already creating policy frameworks. So there is definitely a need to then build this hub in different regions. And through these hubs, we hope to accelerate and amplify the impact of learning ecosystems. So raising their profile, attracting others to explore their potential, bringing in government interest, bringing in funder interest into these learning ecosystems. One of the earlier reports that Valerie Hannon and the Innovation Unit had done was looking at learning ecosystems in the global north. And it was that report that kind of initiated this thinking around that we should also look at learning ecosystems in the global south. So one of the things we want to do is create spaces where we can connect these ecosystems in the south and north and look at where there are alignments, where we could learn from each other, where strategies could be aligned. So that's another piece of work that we want to take into the next phase. And finally, we do see that this work around learning ecosystems could potentially be a 3-year journey. So we are now beginning to co-design with the 11 core learning ecosystems about what this next 3-year plan could look like, which will one be around identifying and understanding more learning ecosystems, building case studies around them. Second would be building these communities of practice and expanding that work. And third would be around finding leapfrogging models, which are truly transforming education in regions and in country contexts. So this is the piece of work that we do want to look at over the next 3 years. So where we are coming to is that there is interest in the learning ecosystems approach among, of course, civil society players, definitely among academicians and people who are looking at learning ecosystems as a strategy for education transformation. Third, potentially from policymakers. We've seen interest from the Delhi government, from the Minister of Education in Perù. There are interests coming in from other education leaders at the policy level. So what could we recommend to policymakers to bring in a more learning ecosystems approach in their policies and implementation? And we hope to build on this work with your support. So we will reach out to all of you, and more of you who have expressed interest in this work. And we'll continue to take in your insights, your wisdom for this work. So thank you very much. It's been a huge honor and pleasure to work with the team on this study, something that's been very close to my heart. Because it brought in insights from the global south and from communities of adversity. So yeah, absolutely honored that we could participate and bring this report out for the sector. Thank you. Back to you, Oliver.
Thank you very much, Vishal. Yes, we are discussing all together and with many other friends on the way we can grow and expand and go more in depth and have more impact on the ground around these learning ecosystems strategies. So yes, we will be sharing more with you. Please do share the report in your own networks. I saw there's so many people that were leading great networks, so please share it and we will be discussing with you further. I know that Michael next to me says that he would like to react and to say a word, and we'll play with our mics there, but is anyone else raising their hand? And Valerie, I don't know if you want to say something. I see our friend Tony is somewhere in there. I don't know if he wants to react. I mean, I don't want to direct it to anybody specifically, but please do raise your hand. And while doing so, I'm turning to Michael. And Michael, please speak loud, and I think it should work now.
Thanks, Olivier. Yeah, closing thoughts now. And I just wanted to build really on something Vishal just said about the global north and the global south dynamic here. I think as we've gone through this study over the last 15 months or so, there's been an underlying question, not always explicit, but important. Are we talking about something instead of the old education system, formal education, or simply as well? Well, I think different countries, different contexts would take a different view. I think in Colombia, it's moving towards instead. I think in Delhi, it's not even as well. It's kind of growing organically out of the formal education system. But maybe the direction of travel is towards instead, not as well. At that point, I think many people in the global north would say, well, that's not for us. We don't want something instead. We wouldn't mind a bit of wraparound to help what we've got, but we don't want something instead. But I think that is also changing. I think of the work that Olli-Pekka and I are doing with some of the countries in the global north on new purposes for education. And there too, we're starting to talk about human flourishing, the remarkable capacities that people need in the 21st century to be full human beings, reconciled to their place and their planet. And at that point, we begin to think that we will need more than formal education in schools. We will need multiple settings. We will need the family. We will need the community. We will need everything. We will need, in other words, the learning ecosystem. But just to connect to Karen's very interesting point, imperfect as they are, schools have been a response to inequity. They sort of level the playing field. At the point where we're dependent on all those other settings, as I say, the family, the community, it gets harder to level the playing field. So I think what we must all think about in the South and in the North, as we move towards this wonderful future, flourishing ecosystems, is how we hang on to education as a lever for equity and fairness. Thanks, Olivier.
Thank you very much, Michael. I think these are, in a way, the closing words. So I want to be respectful of time for everyone. It is great that you were all here throughout this session. Thank you very much to each and every one of you, to the local ecosystems leader, to all the practitioners that had shared their views. Please do download the report. I think it will be ready in a very short while, or it is now ready. So it is online, and maybe share the link once again to access the report. And we'll be happy to see you very soon again. Thank you very much. I see people from Australia and from Peru. So I think we're covering quite a lot of different parts of the world. Thank you very much for being here, and see you very soon.